Good morning, Prism mates. Let's do this. Today is the last day of the United States Supreme Court session. And if you thought that they had not done enough damage already this term, just wait. We have 6 cases that they are going to issue opinions for, and that will begin around 10 a.m. Now, what's important to me here is to do what I always promised, which was a little bit of law school, right? But before we get to those 6 cases, which you can see here, I'm going to tell you their names. I want to let you know that our main focus is going to be on that last one, Trump v. Casa. That is the birthright citizenship case. Okay. But before we get to that, I want to make sure we cover our money, law, and power news, and we take a little break for Prism. It's now more than ever. We need to think about our physical health, our relational health, our intellectual health, spiritual health, and mental health. I haven't done breaks for that, and I want to turn to you, my friends. Hey, good morning, Candy Carol. I was talking to your sister yesterday. We're going to meet up this afternoon. Oh, so guys, maybe since I just saw Candy here, I'm going to give you a sneak peek. Tonight, I am filming, I'm recording an interview with E. Jean Carroll. Yes, my dear friend, E. Jean Carroll, Candy's sister, her new book, Not My Type, which is hysterically funny. I mean, really, this is E. Jean at her best. I feel like she is at the intersection of, like, what did I tell her the other day? I don't know. It's almost like Mark Twain and Fran Lebowitz had a baby, and that baby, I don't know. I can't remember what I said. I don't want to do this on the fly, but her book is marvelous. And we're going to do something fun, our conversation, and I'll be sharing that conversation with you on our show Monday. I'll just feature it. I am so excited for this, you guys. Okay. But speaking of people who go up against Donald Trump, anyhow, so my goal today is to talk to you about all these important things. What are we doing for our physical health, our relational health, our intellectual health, our spiritual health, and mental health? Sometimes what we do is all together. I'm going to check in with you guys on that. So before we launch into the disastrous Supreme Court decision yesterday, which will result in the shutting down of the remaining Planned Parenthood clinics, about 1 in 3 will end up being shuttered because of yesterday's decision. And more than that, it's not just a decision about Planned Parenthood. It's not just a decision about subordinating women. It's a decision that affects our view of what the Civil Rights Act was for. And there is no one better for this discussion than Ketanji Brown Jackson, who wrote the dissent in that decision. Before I jump into yesterday's decision, the Planned Parenthood decision, and get you set up for today's decision on birthright citizenship, I want to do some of our usual money, law, and power topics. Great. Okay. So let's start with money. Donald Trump, and I will not show you any videos of him today. It's a Trump-free zone today. Donald Trump yesterday was trying to make the closing argument to Congress to push through this disastrous budget bill. What he has called his big, beautiful bill is almost as ineffective and dangerous as his big, beautiful bombing campaign, okay, and his big, beautiful, boring existence. And I guess I have to, if you see the word beautiful or hear it in that phrase, think ugly. So here's the deal. This bill is exceedingly unpopular because people are onto it. They understand how much it will really hurt us. I want to share with you this is on Fox News. On Fox News, the analysis. This is the kind of thing that people who don't usually like to face up to the reality of the failing, brutal, and incompetent, racist, sexist, authoritarian, disastrous Trump regime, they see this. Let's play it.
Polls do show this. We've got a whole bunch of polls that show this thing is not popular. I'm not talking about the farm part specifically. I'm talking about the Fox News poll shows that it's under 40% approval. When you look at the Quinnipiac poll, the Pew Research poll, these are all showing that few people favor this thing. 38% favor on the Fox poll. When it comes to the other ones, you can look at the Quinnipiac poll. That one has 53% opposing it. Only 27% support it. And then the Pew poll, here's the thing. A lot of Americans don't like this, even some people who voted for President Trump, for this reason, Madam Secretary, because they don't understand why the cuts have to come from programs like SNAP, like food stamps for the poor, and like Medicare for the poor. That is the problem. So can you make a connection between why that should be okay?
Well, I think it's really important to note that the entire media apparatus has been against this bill from the beginning. But here's what President Trump was elected to do. And I won't comment on Medicare or Medicaid. That's someone else's lane. But I can comment very specifically to food stamps, that at the end of the day, under Joe Biden, the food stamp program, which is the largest by far of any program at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, grew almost 40% under the insane spending of Joe Biden. So most Americans don't have those facts. They're raising their families, they're going to work, they're doing all the things that are great about this country. So that's why we have worked so hard to get that information out. Again, in the food stamp program and across the nutrition programs at USDA, we spend $400 million a day. So to ensure that the right people are receiving the safety net, the food that they need, we have to be able to be more efficient, more effective, and turn these programs around. Otherwise, they're unsustainable. We'll move into bankruptcy and they won't survive.
I don't know if you noticed this, but she didn't really answer the question. That was Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture. And she decided to speak only to her view about problems with food stamps, with the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. And she had no evidence. She just said the program grew under Joe Biden. I think getting food to people who need it, families and children, is a good thing. I think if there's fraud, you use the criminal justice system to prosecute that fraud, right? There is bank fraud. We don't shut down banks. And by the way, you may think, Jen, banks are part of the private sector. Oh, no, my friend. Banks are completely supported and backstopped by the federal government. They're quasi-public and private. Anyhow, I can't think of anything else that you would shut down because there is some cheating, right? You root out the cheating, you make a better system. But she has turned the conversation to Joe Biden. And the fact is, this bill is wildly unpopular, even though when Donald Trump made his closing argument, he lied, as to be expected, saying not a penny would be taken from Medicaid. He also went off onto some very weird tangents. Again, I'm not going to show it to you. Just trust me. He started picking people out in the crowd and saying they were very pretty. And then he said that you're not allowed to say that a waitress is attractive anymore. I mean, it just really was your typical off the rails Donald Trump press conference. So here's the deal. What if they are able to cram this budget through, right? They're already dealing with Elizabeth McDonough, the Senate parliamentarian, who, by the way, I happen to know only because I met her over the years. She is a Vermont Law School graduate. I used to teach there. At any rate, she was not my student. She'd already graduated before I went through. But she's a lovely person, and people sometimes get angry at her, Democrats and Republicans alike, when she decides, as Senate parliamentarian, when Congress wants to pass legislation using the reconciliation method, which only requires 51 votes. I'm talking about the Senate, right? When the Senate wants to pass legislation with only 51 votes, and they want to bypass that cloture rule, right? That requires, we call it the filibuster rule or the cloture rule, that requires 60 votes to end debate, right? You can't even move a bill. Almost all legislation, you cannot move forward unless you have 60 votes. That's how it works. However, with budget bills, through the so-called reconciliation process, meaning you're reconciling the House bill with the Senate bill, you can just have 51 votes. But the trick to that is it's not a grab bag. It's not a kitchen sink free-for-all. And what the Republicans tried to do here is throw into their budget bill things that had nothing to do with budgets or wouldn't affect the budgets. And without getting into the detail of what's called the so-called Byrd rule, named after Senator Byrd, Elizabeth McDonough, Senate parliamentarian, has to scour the Senate bill and say, this isn't kosher if you leave this in. So over the past few days, Republicans in the Senate are working through trying to strip of their bill things that would make it not work or adjust the language. Now, let's assume for a moment this comes together and Donald Trump's bill gets passed, probably only on one party grounds, right? It gets passed. This is a disaster for us. And it will hopefully be a disaster also for Republicans in 2026, right? That is the hope that happens in the midterms. So it's terrible, but it could result in kicking them out and taking control of the Senate or the House. On the other hand, if the bill doesn't pass, that's great for us, but it will also hurt Donald Trump because it makes him look weak and like a failure, and will also hurt Republicans. So the way I look at this is we have to sit tight. This is the ugly process of legislation. And the reality is Donald Trump and his Republican team are liars, and they will lie about this bill. They will lie about, what is in it. They will lie about who the cuts will impact, and we just have to ignore those lies. Now, moving on from there, let's talk about our next topic in the intersection again of money, law, and power. And this is that Donald Trump finally had a briefing provided to Congress on what happened, all the details surrounding last Saturday night's strike by the United States military on 3 supposed nuclear sites in Iran. And that briefing happened. And I want to share with you 2 different senators. I've got Lindsey Graham from the Senate, from the Republican side of the Senate, and Chris Murphy from the Democratic side, talking about what they heard in that briefing. So let's play Lindsey first.
The program was obliterated at those 3 sites, but they still have ambitions. I don't know where the 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium exists, but it wasn't part of the target set.
Are you concerned that in light of that several years, when the administration is saying it's obliterated, it suggests that they're not able to build a weapon. You're saying in several years, perhaps they'll be able to. Isn't there
that's what I'm saying. They're obliterated today, but you can reconstitute. I don't want people to think that the site wasn't severely damaged or obliterated. It was. But having said that, I don't want people to think the problem is over, because it's not.
Okay. It was really loud in that hallway, so I wanted to highlight a few of the things that Lindsey Graham said. He said that he wants to know what happened to the 900 pounds of enriched uranium that was moved from some of these sites, maybe moved from that Fordo site, from that bunker area. What has happened to it, right? Where did it go? Because he doesn't believe it's gone. He also is concerned that if the whole purpose, of this strike was to set back their nuclear weapons program, given that the enriched uranium is still out there, that hasn't been effective. However, he did try to help Donald Trump save face by saying that he was not going to say the site wasn't obliterated. But the uranium was moved. It's not clear. It's like he's trying to have it both ways. He's obviously not happy. Now let's listen to Chris Murphy on the Democratic side.
But it doesn't appear as if the program has been anywhere close to obliterated. And then that's the real danger here, is that the president seems to be deliberately misleading the public when, in fact, Iran still has the potential to rush to a bomb in a matter of months.
Is there a way how you would describe the current status of the nuclear program based on what you heard today?
Well, again, you cannot bomb knowledge out of existence. So, it's true that Israel has targeted a lot of the scientists, but Iran still has the know-how to put back together a nuclear program. And if they still have that enriched material, and if they still have centrifuges, and if they still have the capability to very quickly move those centrifuges into what we call a cascade, then we have not set back that program by years. We have set it back by months, and the strikes potentially could have the impact of convincing this regime in Tehran or the next regime that they now have no choice but to rush to a nuclear weapon. And we already know that they have some capabilities that are so far underground that we can never reach them. So they have the ability to move a lot of what has been saved into areas where there's no American bombing capacity that can reach it.
Wow. Okay. So, people came out with different impressions, but the bottom line is these efforts by the United States is supposedly flawless. As Pete Hegg said, strike on Iran doesn't make us safer. It may make us even less safe. Now, I see Jeff Curry. I like this. Where does uranium come from? No way gonna Google that. But why not? I'm gonna Google it because you can find out, Jeff Curry. I just Googled it on my phone and I got myself to the Department of Energy website, which says, here we go. It says nuclear fuel facts. Okay. Do you want to know this, Jeff? I think you have done this for us. Jeff wants to know. So uranium is a silvery white metallic chemical element in the periodic tables. Remember that from science class? I like the periodic tables. There are a lot of letters in there, though. So it's in the periodic table with the atomic number of 92. It is assigned the chemical symbol U. Oh, that's simple, U. A uranium atom has 92 protons and 92 electrons, of which, okay, you don't need to know that many details. Where do you find uranium, Jeff? Uranium occurs naturally in low concentrations in soil, rock, and water, and is commercially extracted from uranium-bearing minerals such as uraninite. Uranium ore can be mined from open pits or underground excavations. The ore can then be crushed and treated at a mill to separate the valuable uranium from the ore. The ore deposits in the ground in situ leaching. The uranium may also be dissolved directly from the ore deposits in the ground. So it's called in situ leaching. So you can have an ore deposit in the ground that has uranium mixed in, and then it can be pumped to the surface. Uranium mined from the earth is stored, handled, and sold as uranium oxide concentrate, which the chemical symbol of that is U3O8, right? 3 molecules of uranium bonded to 8 molecules of oxygen. Oh my God, I'm going to stop here. I loved science class. I could go on and on. Sorry, Jeff. Sorry. Jeff is like, quiet, I'm learning. Anyhow, so yeah, I'm glad Jeff said that. And oops. Yeah, Twisted Nerves love science class. Here's the deal. We can still do science, right? But okay, so that is the deal. So that might explain why these uranium enrichment sites are so deep underground, right? maybe they're underground, not just to hide them, but maybe that's where they're actually like scraping and separating the ore from the uranium. This is so damn cool. Now, I'm sure that Jeff is wondering, and as am I, what the heck is ore? So, ore is apparently there are different types of ores, and I am not sure. It's just ore, I think, refers to just rock or sediment that contains a valuable mineral. And I can look at just yeah, it can be, it's a general word. It's not like ore is not in the periodic table. I think it's like the way we might say the word metal, right? We might say ore. Okay, that's what I got. Enough of the science, guys. Okay, let's go back to money, law, and power. We've covered how unpopular Trump's bill is. We've covered how Donald Trump is still trying to save face about the really ineffective strike on Iran. And now, the third topic before we get ourselves up to the disastrous Supreme Court on a rampage is more on Zohan Mandami. And we have, as you have probably seen, the mainstream press has spent more time on this candidate for mayor of New York, treating it like it's going to be this complete authoritarian takeover of the world, right? Because this guy wants to allow people to have, I don't know, free bus passes and affordable rent, and wants to tax the rich more. That is what the mainstream media is focused on. There are people who are, I mean, there's been more attention paid to this than there has been to the kidnapping of people off the street by masked agents without names, right? There is more attention. That should tell you a lot about the priorities of the corporate-owned media, right? They are more afraid because of their, corporate owners, which in some cases, yeah, of course, these are publicly traded companies, but dominant shareholders in these companies, people who manage them. I don't know why it's the case. But people are afraid, so afraid. The biggest thing they're afraid of is he suggested that there be some city-owned grocery stores. And there are people freaking out about about is this nationalizing the whole, commerce? Guys, wake the F up. Didn't you know that there are many states where the only place you can buy alcohol is at a state-run package store? Where were you for the past 50 or more years? Holy hell, right? So it seems to me that when we have a kleptocratic fascist dictator running the country, who is literally, if you had paid attention, if the mainstream media had even bothered to tell you, who has taken the government is taking a share in U.S. Steel. Are they reporting on that? No. Why do that? But you've got this young socialist in New York who wants to offer some grocery stores that are run by the city. Wait till they hear about public libraries or public roads. Wait till they hear, okay, public schools. How about the post office? Have you ever noticed anybody that we have some public options alongside private options, and that works just fine and is actually good? So watch out, friends. We are going to see one of the biggest smear campaigns we have probably ever seen against a person. And this is because it's not just about New York City. It's about the fact that people can see how excited young people are about this. Apparently, the Run for Something website, which encourages younger people to run for office, is getting a ton of new people there. And by the way, I think everybody should run for office. And I want to be really clear about this. One last thing on this before I share Brad Lander talking to Jake Tapper. You know how if, let's say, an industry or society might be done, let's say there's a field that's dominated by men and there aren't many women in it. and you said something like, some of these good old boys need to move aside, or if you said the good old boy guard needs to move aside and let women have a voice. If you said, let's say we're talking about back in the day, and even now, but back in the day when there were very few women in Congress or in the House or the Senate. And if I said something like the good old boy network, if we saw a woman run for office and everyone got really excited about it, and I said something like, it's time for the good old boy network to wake up and that we need women in office. If I said that and the response was, why do you hate men? That would be weird. I'm just saying let women have a voice. And if your response was, well, we don't need women in office, men can look out for their concerns. Can't women just work with them? Okay. So that is the same thing I am saying about this. We have the party, Democratic Party, dominated by people who are in their 70s and 80s. And fine, what I'm saying is step aside so young people can be elected. If they don't step aside, those seats will never be available for election. It really is, in some cases, a zero-sum game. Am I saying everybody who is older should go away? What in the world? I am saying make space for young people. And if you say to me, well, someone who's in their 80s, they can represent young people. Yeah, just like men can represent women. Look at the U.S. Supreme Court when they have women on the court. It makes a big difference. So representation matters, and it's oppressive, insulting, and illogical to suggest that young people's voices shouldn't be heard. And it's crazy to think that someone who has 5 years left on this planet shouldn't have already stepped aside and let the next generation step forward to make plans for their future. That's just my view. And I don't mean step aside like die. And I don't mean you shouldn't have a job. I'm talking specifically about areas where we're talking about representing people in policies that take years to unfold. It seems arrogant to think otherwise. Okay, I've gone off now. Now let's talk about this. Jake Tapper had Brad Lander, who notably Jewish New Yorker, who's the controller, which is the person in charge of finances in New York, the top dog in that. And he was running in the primary for mayor of New York. And he decided to cross-endorse Mamdani and his voice as coming together with a Muslim American, Jewish American coming together was a really beautiful thing. And it helped him cross the finish line. And now we are hearing, and I'm hearing this from family members too, that Mamdani is an anti-Semite. And let me just be clear. I have a different view of what globalize the intifada means than him. I understand. I talked to my friend Dima Obadallah about that last night. For a lot of people, intifada means struggle, right? It means struggle for Palestinian rights. For other people, when you hear intifada, you associate it with violence against Jewish Israelis. There are different ideas. And some people say, well, then don't use it at all because it's hurtful to Jews and Israelis. Well, the counter is true. When I say the word Zionist, I think of a whole big bucket of types of Zionists, everything from liberal Zionists to Zionists who believe that settlers should violently evict non-Jews from the West Bank, for example. So I don't want people who are racist and Islamophobic to own the Zionist term. To me, Zionist can just mean Israel should have a right to exist, right? I was talking to Dean last night, and he's like, to him, intifada just means struggle for rights and freedom. And to me, Zionist just means Israel should exist. When some Jews hear the word intifada, they think that's an attack on Jews. And when some people of Islamic descent hear Zionists, they think that means an attack on Muslims. Okay, so, or specifically Arab Muslims. Okay, so this is a problem with language. I don't think we should outlaw any language. I think we should use the approach from the book Getting to Yes. Let's not do position-based bargaining. Let's do interest-based. Let's talk to each other, right? So I don't think globalizing intifada means violence against Jews. I do think sometimes when people hear that, it triggers anti-Semitism. I think some anti-Israeli language and thoughts are anti-Semitic, but not all, right? Okay, that's a fact. Now, when he was asked to announce the term globalized intifada, it's not something that he said, but he explained his reasoning. This is Mamdani. People are concerned when I've spoken in support of him on social media. There are some people who have responded, yeah, but I don't like what he said on October 8th. So I went over to Twitter to see. And on October 8th, he denounced the violence. And he also said that there shouldn't be any more. He denounced the violence. And he said it's terrible what's happened to Palestinians and to Israelis. I wouldn't have probably done the same thing. I don't support the BDS, the boycott, divest, sanction efforts that he does. But so what? I think he's a great person. And I just want to hammer this home. How many times have you heard people complain? Centrist Democrats and progressives complain that the far left is purist. And unless you align to every single thing that they believe, you refuse to support a candidate. I think that's what progressives and centrist Democrats are themselves doing. You don't have to agree with everything he's saying or doing or his approaches, but it is an absolute lie to say he is an anti-Semite unless you want to equate any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. There are others who say, but his father, he's a professor at Columbia, studies anti-colonialism, worked with Edward Said, and you don't like what his father's views are. Okay. His father is not running for mayor of New York. Okay. And engage in these ideas. We don't get to peace and harmony by just labeling people, because what I see happening is this effort for people now, it's been several years after October 7th, to ignore the fact that what is going on in Gaza is acceptable. I believe it's a war crime, and at this point, I believe the effort is for genocide. I said it. And I believe that now, because I think what Netanyahu, and I, by the way, I'm not angry at Israel any more than I'm angry at the United States. Trump is a criminal, a fascist, and I've said that. Does that make me hate Americans? Does that make me hate the United States? No. Does that make me think the United States can't exist, shouldn't exist? No. And are there some criticisms of, I'm going on and on. You get this idea. And I am on a soapbox on this because the propaganda and the lies that are being spread to try to capture and anchor the entire Jewish community is disgusting. And either you stand with Democrats on this, or you are like one of these Trumpers. Or let me say it worse. One last thing before Lander. Kirsten Gillibrand, who you know I am not impressed with. This is a senator from New York who pushed through that crazy crypto bill. The bill that is and supports an utter scam, is a kind of bailout of the crypto crooks. She pushed that through. And now she is smearing Mamdani. I think she needs to look in the mirror and face the fact that she is bought and paid for by very wealthy interests in the crypto industry, and that wealthy people all across the board don't like the idea of a socialist in office. And I think Gillibrand is disgusting. That's what I'm going to say. And now let's look at someone who I think is marvelous. Let's go.
Reaction to that attack I mean, it's appalling. He has faced death threats during the campaign. A city council member called for his deportation. It's just gross, racist bigotry. But meanwhile, he's running an optimistic, upbeat campaign for a New York where everybody belongs. And I feel proud as the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in New York City to be supporting somebody who would be the first Muslim mayor. Like, what could be more New York City than that?
I feel that. Thank you, Brad Lander. And as a Jewish person, if you're thinking this and feeling this, don't stay on the sidelines. Find a way to step forward. It's hard, but just like, talking to your Trump relatives, sometimes, almost all the time, we have to reach into our own community and talk about how things are. And be forceful about this, not mealy-mouthed. Okay, my friends. Now, it is time to get ready for the Supreme Court. And before I do that, I want to check in with everyone real quick on Prism. And in the chat, I'm curious, my friends, my Prism mates, for you guys, I'm scrolling down. I'm getting to the most recent posts. I can't always watch the chat. Yep, this is true. Okay. Hey, Lisa Marie Prism mates, let's talk. Can someone tell me something that they have done recently that has helped them achieve some of these Prism goals, these health goals? What have you done recently? I think I'm going to share with you something I've done. I've learned how to make flax seed bread. It was an accident. My aunt had come to visit, and she likes to put like a scoop of that milled ground flaxseed onto her oatmeal that she makes in the morning. And so on the bag of it's like Bob's Red Mill premium ground flaxseed. You got to get the premium because the organic is a little gamey tasting. And so on the back of the Bob's ground flaxseed is a recipe for flaxseed crackers. Like those Mary's Gone crackers that are super expensive, like gluten-free crackers. Now, before what happened to me was I kind of followed the recipe, but I didn't make it thin enough because my cookie sheets are a little smaller and I probably should have just separated it into two. And so when I baked it, it's more like a thin, if you bought thin sliced pumpernickel bread, it's like kind of that, it's just so good. And what makes it good is you add everything seasoning. So you can add by the way, all that you put in here, literally, it's 2 cups of the ground flaxseed. And then into this dry bowl of ground flaxseed, you put some garlic powder and some onion powder and some salt. And, you can also just use the everything seasoning from Trader Joe's. And with a heavy hand, then I mix it up. And then for every 2 cups of this ground flaxseed, you add just 1 cup of water. That's it. And you mix it up, and it's kind of like a sticky dough. And then you put down on a cookie sheet the baking paper, right? Parchment paper. And then you kind of hold on to the parchment paper as you sort of plop this bunch of dough, and you spread it out with a spatula until it's even, and then sprinkle more of these everything seasoning on top, and you bake it for about 30-35 minutes at 400. I can't believe I'm giving recipes here, but it is so good. Then you've got to test it. And also, by the way, you score it. So if you want to make it into crackers, you make it smaller and thinner. If you want to make it into bread, it makes 6 slices of bread. Then you cool it and you store it. It is amazing. Oh my God. Okay. So now I should do cooking videos, Candy. Do you think that would be good, you guys? Cooking videos, me making healthy food. Michael is probably laughing because he is the cook in the family. Like, I only have a few things that I make, but you're right. I'm going to start doing some cooking videos. I would have fun. Okay. So guys, let's talk. What have you, I'm scrolling back to what you guys are doing. Okay. Let's AJ Vintage has started taking daily walks, and that's improves your mental and physical health. AJ, I was taking daily walks, and it was like 98 degrees here. And my inability to walk in that kind of steamy heat has made me cranky. I'm seeing that Lisa and Lou garden, cook, and do home repair. Kissy Cat likes to get good sleep. Walking, crocheting. Oh, crocheting scrubbies for dishes. That's a good idea. Or bathing. Oh, speaking of crocheting, Kissy Cat, I saw someone the day after Mandami won. She had already crocheted like a tank top. It's red with white lettering, and it says "Hot Commie Summer." And so I sent a picture of that to my daughter Emily and said FYI, and she said noted. So I am praying that Emily crochets me a top that says "Hot Commie Summer." I'm not a crocheter. I'm just a knitter. I've got other gardeners. Violet Summer, walking dogs in the forest preserve, being in nature. Okay, Michael McAndrews, fair enough. Don't say I don't give the counter argument. Bagels and cream cheese. Okay, Michael, hear me out. A slice of this. Hear me out. With the everything bread, a smear of cream cheese, some lox and tomato. It's to die for. I know you don't believe me. Don't make it cracker thin. Trust me. You just see. Okay, what else? Oh no, Bobby had a stomach virus. Lisa Marie likes gardening and baking, but better at cooking. I'm terrible at cooking. I'm only good at baking. Someone does kayaking. I'm making everyone hungry. Michael says, okay. Crochet pink hats. Yay. Okay. Guys, thank you for indulging me. This has been fun. So, okay, great. So now let us move. Now that we have released some good endorphins, I think we can face some facts today. And let's talk about this. KBJ issued yesterday a remarkable dissent in this decision of involving Planned Parenthood. And the case, I'm sorry, it's called Medina versus Planned Parenthood South Atlantic. And it really is hugely disappointing, the decision. And before I get to that, I want to first share with you the impact of this decision. Let's talk about the real people. And so to do that, I'm sharing with you a video. It was from a hearing from a little while ago. Elizabeth Warren just shared this, asking someone who works for Planned Parenthood, I think in Missouri, to talk about what this impact is and will be. So let me,
Dr. Baum,
here we go.
You are the chief medical officer of Planned Parenthood Great Rivers in Missouri. So just explain to us, where will your patients go if more Planned Parenthood locations are closed?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the answer is there is nowhere for them to go. So we are part of the safety net. And while there are other providers that are part of the safety net as well, they are overwhelmed. And so there is nowhere in St. Louis or in the Ozarks or in Southern Illinois that can absorb the patients that we care for on a daily basis. So again, what I think will happen is there will be longer waiting times, diagnoses will be delayed. Again, cancer diagnoses, infection diagnoses, people will delay care because there will be long travel times and long times to wait, and there will be dire health consequences.
Okay, so I'd like to start with the impact. So that is the direct impact of yesterday's decision. And let me tell you a little bit about the decision before I get to KBJ. Now, I'm noting that it is 9:17. And my plan is to talk about this decision and then fill you in on what is going to happen today at the Supreme Court. I want to be able to be with you, if you would like, at right here. We can stay at 10 a.m. when the decisions start coming down. And in order to accomplish that, my plan is to share with you the oral argument after we get through this KBJ very briefly discussion. Is to share with you, to play for you, and it has the words on it to play for you. You'll see this, the oral argument from the birthright citizenship case. And as you listen, that argument will get us to the point where decisions are coming down. And then I will stop that and I will have my eye on we'll watch on the screen together. We'll screen share from the from the SCOTUS blog website as the decisions come down and we can discuss them. Now, I realize there might only be a handful of you doing that, but I think it's important for those who want to stick around and find out. So what I think makes the most sense, let me just back this up. I'm doing this on the fly. I think I need to, no, we'll stay here. I was going to do a new window, but let's just stick where we are now. Okay. So let me talk to you about this terrible Planned Parenthood decision. It's called Medina versus Planned Parenthood South Atlantic. And the problem with this decision is that it is multifaceted here, right? So in this opinion, ultimately, what the court did here was say that ordinary people, someone who would be a patient at Planned Parenthood, doesn't have the right to sue, right? Doesn't have the grounds, the standing to be able to sue the state, to be able to have Medicaid, if they're a Medicaid beneficiary, pay for a visit to Planned Parenthood. In other words, this law, according to the 6th Justice majority, Medicaid has language. The statute authorizing Medicaid has language saying that it has to reimburse you or pay for your visiting any qualified provider. However, although it says any qualified provider, what the Supreme Court majority says, it doesn't confer the right for you or I, if we're a Medicaid beneficiary, to choose a specific provider. Okay, so I want you to know right now what KBJ had to say. She wrote a fiery dissent for the ages, and I'm only going to read you the first paragraph and the conclusion of her dissent. Okay, so in her dissent, we had Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan join. Here we go. The Civil Rights Act of 1871 was an exercise in great ambition. I'm sorry. I just had my case, Medina. Okay, I'm sorry, it scrolled down. I apologize. The Civil Rights Act of 1871 was an exercise in grand ambition. It had to be. In the wake of the Civil War, the American South was consumed by a wave of terrorist violence designed to disenfranchise and intimidate the country's newly freed citizens and their allies. The threat was existential, not just for the newly liberated, but for democracy itself, and required bold intervention. It was precisely because of the goals of the 1871 Act, that they were so ambitious that those most committed to the structures it targeted, including many in South Carolina, opposed the measure so vehemently. A century and a half later, the project of stymieing one of the country's great civil rights laws continues. In this latest chapter, South Carolina urges our court to adopt a narrow and ahistorical reading of the 1871 Act's first section, which is codified today at 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. That venerable provision permits any citizen to obtain redress in federal court for, quote, the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution and its laws, end quote, and laws, end quote, of the United States. South Carolina asks us to hollow out that provision so that the state can evade liability for violating the rights of its Medicaid recipients to choose their own doctors. The court abides South Carolina's request. I would not. For that reason, I respectfully dissent. That is extremely powerful. Now, one last thing when we get to the end of her decision. Congress enacted the Medicaid Act's free choice of provider provision to ensure that Medicaid recipients have the right to choose their own doctors. The court's decision to foreclose Medicaid recipients from using Section 1983 to enforce that provision thwarts Congress's will twice over. Once, in dulling the tool Congress created for enforcing all federal rights, and again, in vitiating one of those rights altogether. The court's decision today is not the first to so weaken the landmark civil rights protections that Congress enacted during the Reconstruction era. That means we do have a sense of what comes next. As with those past rulings, today's decision is likely to result in tangible harm to real people. At a minimum, it will deprive Medicaid recipients in South Carolina of their only meaningful way of enforcing a right that Congress has expressly granted to them. And more concretely, it will strip those South Carolinians and countless other Medicaid recipients around the country of a deeply personal freedom, the ability to decide who treats us at our most vulnerable. The court today disregards Congress's expressed desire to prevent that very outcome. So do you see? The stakes are much higher than merely shutting down the result of depriving Planned Parenthood of funds. Now, I want you to keep in mind, Medicaid already prohibits Planned Parenthood from providing abortion care. So what we're talking about is Medicaid recipients only using Planned Parenthood for things like regular annual exams or birth control or mammograms or general medical care, right? Medicaid is not funding abortions. That was because of something called the Hyde Amendment after Senator Hyde, H-Y-D-E. So what they're doing, though, is depriving these clinics of patients, and therefore funding, and therefore shrinking the staff, and therefore making them unable to continue. That's why 1 in 3 will shut down. So I just want to make that clear. Okay, now, my friends, what I want to do now is switch over. It's 9:26, and I want to make sure that we get in a crazy town. It's essential before we switch over to running that watching or listening to and looking at the justices in the oral argument for the big case today. So you know what is on board here for today. I am mostly focused on that last case of the 6, Trump v. Casa. It's possible that this case comes down last. I'm not sure when it will. But as each of these cases come down, I will share with you. We'll be watching together beginning at 10 the SCOTUS blog and talking about what this case means and making it super, super simple. Okay, that is the plan. And now let us go to Crazy Town. Okay, I'm ready for your crazy town. It is Carolyn Leavitt, and you're not going to believe it. Let's go with this. You're not going to believe this. It's insane.
Because I promised you earlier.
So the Ayatollah Khomeini came out and said that Iran will, quote, never surrender to the U.S. That being said, what remains to do with the possible responses from Iranian proxies in the region and even in the U.S.?
Look, we saw the Ayatollah's video, and when you have a totalitarian regime, you have to save face. I think any common sense, open-minded person knows the truth about the precision strikes on Saturday night. They were wildly successful, and it's what led to the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran, which the president is very grateful for. And the United States of America remains prepared to defend our assets. And
did you hear that? I want to
region, and again, I
just want to play the part that I love.
Possible responses.
Okay, here's the part I love.
Proxies in the region and even in the U.S.
Look, we saw the Ayatollah's video, and when you have a totalitarian regime, you have to save face. I think any common sense, open-minded.
When you have a totalitarian regime, you have to save face. She doesn't even see the irony. I mean, people, can you even believe it? Unbelievable. Okay, guys. So this would be when I would say goodbye to you. So this would be see you later. And for my folks who want to stick around, or just leave this on, leave it running on your computer and come back at 10. But if you want to have law school, we are going to law school today. And here's how we're going to do it. We are going to play for you. I'm sharing the screen. This is how we're doing it until 10 a.m. We are going to show you what this is all about. So let me tell you what's right here. This is Trump v. Casa. This is the OIE site. And what you can see is that there has not been a decision. The case is pending. But over here on the left, I think you can see, if I click on this, we can play the oral argument. And what's really cool here is you will be able to see it being read and you will be able to hear it. So let's go.
We will hear argument this morning in case 24A884, Trump versus Casa Incorporated, and the consolidated cases. General Sauer.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. On January 20th, 2025, President Trump issued Executive Order 14160, protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship. This order reflects the original meaning of the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed citizenship to the children of former slaves, not to illegal aliens or temporary visitors. Multiple district courts promptly issued nationwide or universal injunctions blocking this order, and a cascade of such universal injunctions followed. Since January 20th, district courts have now issued 40 universal injunctions against the federal government, including 35 from the same 5 judicial districts. This is a bipartisan problem that has now spanned the last 5 presidential administrations. Universal injunctions exceed the judicial power granted in Article 3, which exists only to address the injury to the complaining party. They transgress the traditional bounds of equitable authority, and they create a host of practical problems. Such injunctions prevent the percolation of novel and difficult legal questions. They encourage rampant forum shopping. They require judges to make rushed, high-stakes, low-information decisions. They circumvent Rule 23 by offering all the benefits but none of the burdens of class certification. They operate asymmetrically, forcing the government to win everywhere while the plaintiffs can win anywhere. They invert the ordinary hierarchy of appellate review. They create the ongoing risk of conflicting judgments. They increase the pressures on this court's emergency docket. They create what Justice Powell described as repeated and essentially head-on confrontations between the life-tenured and representative branches of government. And they disrupt the Constitution's careful balancing of the separation of powers. I welcome the court's questions.
General Sauer, these universal injunctions, as you say, have proliferated over the last 3 decades or so. Would you discuss, though, the origins of universal injunctions? In particular, I'm interested in sort of historical analogs or the historical pedigree, particularly the Bill of Peace that was proffered by respondents.
Yes, Justice Thomas, as you, I think, first pointed out in your separate opinion in Trump against Hawaii, the Bill of Peace is something very distinct from a universal injunction. So the Bill of Peace involved a resolution of a small, discrete set of claims of a small, discrete group, and even more fundamentally, it was binding on the members of that class and those represented by the class. So it's much more analogous to a modern class action under Rule 23. And in fact, as we've argued in other cases, and as this court has described in opinions like Ortiz, the Bill of Peace evolved into and is directly developed into, so to speak, the modern class action that has all the same features of a Bill of Peace. So in the words of Chief Judge Sutton in the Sixth Circuit, the Bill of Peace, it was a domesticated animal that looks nothing like the dragon of a universal injunction.
I'm sorry. Here, there's a discrete identified group on one issue. Does citizenship mean are you born in the territory of the United States, or does it mean are you loyal to someone else, which is your claim, or are your parents loyal to someone else? So that's no different than what happened in a Bill of Peace. The United States is bigger, so it extends more broadly, but it's still an identifiable group on a discrete, singular question.
Your Honor, I'd say 3 things in response to that. First of all, our primary contention is that the citizenship clause related to the children of former slaves, not to illegal aliens who weren't even present as a discrete class at that time. But more fundamentally here, as to the issue of the Bill of Peace, there are critical differences. The Bill of Peace was a binding judgment that would bind absent class members. Here we have the asymmetry.
Well, here class actions don't bind anyone who opts out. So class actions are not like bills of peace.
I would think that a Rule 23b2 class action, which would be the relevant analog here, would be one that would be binding on absent class members and would not have the same notice and opt-out procedures. And more fundamentally, that sort of argument that there's a commonality here among, all the people who purport to be affected by this is the sort of argument that's made in class certification.
So can I ask you a question? Your theory here is arguing that Article 3 and principles of equity both prohibit federal courts from issuing universal injunctions. Do I have your argument correct?
We argue both of those.
You argue both of
bases.
those?
Yeah.
If that's true, that means even the Supreme Court doesn't have that power.
The Supreme Court would have the authority to issue binding precedent nationwide, but as
But
this
we
court,
couldn't enforce it against universally, is your argument.
if there was a decision that violated the precedent of the court, then the affected plaintiffs could get a separate judgment.
And
So
that
is what
means
this court,
you're talking about the hundreds and thousands of people who weren't part of the judgment of the court. They would all have to file individual actions?
not necessarily. There are other,
or a class action.
a class action would be the way
Isn't
that,
that makes no sense whatsoever.
respectfully, we believe that.
Well, what was the purpose of the Bill of Peace if not to settle a legal question finally? And if even the Supreme Court doesn't have that right and must invite hundreds of thousands of lawsuits, what are we buying into?
If a set of claims satisfies the rigorous criteria of Rule 23, Rule 23 is the modern analog of a Bill of Peace. We have something very different here.
No, we don't, because the argument here is that the president is violating an established, not just one, but by my count, 4 established Supreme Court precedents. We have the one ARC case where we said fealty to a foreign sovereign doesn't defeat your entitlement, your parents' fealty to a foreign sovereign doesn't defeat your entitlement to citizenship as a child. We have another case where we said that even if your parents are here illegally, if you're born here, you're a citizen. We have yet another case that says even if your parents came here and were stopped at the border, but you were born in our territory, you're still a citizen. And we have another case that says even if your parents secured citizenship illegally, you're still a citizen. So as far as I see it, this order violates 4 Supreme Court precedents.
Yeah,
and you are claiming that not just the Supreme Court, that both the Supreme Court and no lower court can stop an executive from universally from violating that holding, those holdings by this court.
We are not claiming that because we're conceding that there could be an inappropriate case.
Only a class, only by a class.
Can I hear the rest of his answer?
A Rule 23 class action. And then the more fundamental point as to all those Supreme Court decisions you referred to.
So what do we do temporarily?
Temporarily, the court may issue, the lower courts may issue injunctions that remediate the injuries to the plaintiffs that appear before them. Lower courts in appropriate cases may certify class action.
So when a new president orders that because there's so much gun violence going on in the country, and he comes in and he says, I have the right to take away the guns from everyone, then people, and he sends out the military to seize everyone's guns. We and the courts have to sit back and wait until every named plaintiff gets, or every plaintiff whose gun is taken comes into court.
In appropriate cases, courts have certified class actions on an emergency basis. We found at least 4 cases in recent years where that was done. But more fundamentally, we profoundly disagree with the characterization of the merits. This is now fully briefed in the Ninth Circuit in case number 25-807, where we describe how that characterization of the holding of Wong Kim Ark and the other decisions is profoundly incorrect. And
You
that
still
is
have counsel. Could I ask you about a different type of case that has broader impact than on the particular claimant? Like a claimant who's alleging that the districting in a particular case has resulted in racial discrimination against him or her based on how the district is drawn. Now, a judicial decision about that one plaintiff would implicate the redistricting throughout the whole case. So throughout the whole state. How does your theory address that situation?
That would be what you might call an indivisible remedy, where what the court is doing there by, for example, redrawing the district lines is, as this court said in Gill against Whitford, the only way to remediate the injury of voting in an unconstitutionally drawn district. That is similar to abatement of a public nuisance or, for example, in the school desegregation cases, where remediating the injury to the plaintiff before the court necessarily has collateral consequences to many others. And certain environmental cases might have a similar thing. For example, you stop the local plant from pouring, water pollution into the water. That benefits the plaintiff. It happens to benefit a bunch of other people. Now, that's very different than what we have in these universal injunctions, where it is a divisible remedy. I mean, I point to the holding of the District of Massachusetts in this case, looking at the individual plaintiffs. That court said, well, obviously, I don't have to give a universal injunction to protect individuals other than the individual plaintiffs. They are given complete relief by an injunction that tells federal officials only to treat their children as
but
citizens.
why? I guess the question is why does the law require that? I mean, I appreciate that a court could, in a divisible remedy kind of case, narrow in to the plaintiff, but you seem to be suggesting that Article 3 or Rule 23 or something requires that, and I guess I don't really understand it.
If I may offer two responses to that. In the Article 3 context, that is the principle announced in Worth against Selden, announced in Gill against Whitford, and Lewis against Casey, where this court has said again and again, what we do in the Article 3 context is grant remedy that is tailored to, grant remedies that are tailored to remove the injury to the complaining plaintiff. Sometimes they have even very broad collateral consequences. But in the Article 3 context, what the court has not done, and every time it's focused on this in National Treasuries Union, Employees Union, in the
But I guess I don't see why then the divisible remedies or indivisible remedies is an argument. I mean, if Article 3 is suggesting that the court has to focus in on the plaintiff only, then it would seem to me that that would be the power requirement across the board. I thought Article 3 was really about limiting the court's power with respect to jurisdiction, that we say the court has to determine whether or not there's subject matter jurisdiction over the issue and whether or not there's personal jurisdiction over the defendant. And once you have those things, the court can evaluate the merits of the legal issue and issue, especially in equity, appropriate relief. Now, I appreciate that there are some prudential concerns that the court considers, but it seems to me that in many, many, many circumstances, we have not required the court to limit their relief to the particular plaintiff as a matter of constitutional Article 3 requirement.
I disagree with that, and I'd offer a response both first as to Article 3 and then as to the scope of equitable authority. In the Article 3 context, this court said in Worth against Selden, for example, that the Article 3 judicial power exists only to redress the injury to the complaining parties. Again, in Gill against Whitford and Lewis against Casey.
All right, so let me give you a hypothetical. So suppose we have a manufacturing plant that unlawfully releases environmental toxins into the air, and we have a plaintiff who lives near the plant, brings a nuisance lawsuit and says they're being harmed by unlawful release. Your argument suggests that the judgment for the plaintiff has to narrow in on preventing, to the extent possible, preventing harm to the plaintiff. But it seems to me that that's not necessarily the case. You suggest with the Chief Justice in response to him that there can be incidental beneficiaries, that the court could say no more toxins if it's unlawful for the defendant to do that, correct?
Yes, we do.
So why, if your Article 3 principle is correct?
Because again, the Article 3 principle is remedying the injury to the plaintiff, or set of plaintiffs, could be many, who are before the court.
Right.
That has collateral consequences. That could help.
Let me ask you on that point, would one distinction be who's bound by the judgment? Like, I'm wondering whether if the plaintiff needs, you can only, I think Judge Strauss said in the 8th Circuit when addressing this issue, you can't peel off part of a nuisance, so the whole thing has to be shut down. Could a neighbor sue affirmatively to hold the nuisance maker in contempt if he started to begin again the nuisance?
That's a great point. It would not be bounding on those collaterally benefited parties, so to speak. I don't want to call them parties because they're not parties before the court. And that, of course, highlights one of the deep problems with the universal.
No, but why is
Could you
that
do
the
that?
answer, though?
Could you do that now for the universal injunction? Could a plaintiff, for example, who has the protection of the universal injunction but was not named in the suit, bring a contempt action of the sort I just described?
They could not do that, but what they could do is run to any of 93 other judicial districts and bring their own lawsuit if they.
No. Under the injunction as it stands, under the injunctions as they stand, could a non-named plaintiff who has the benefit of the universal injunction that's currently in place, could that plaintiff bring a contempt proceeding?
We would,
or I guess I shouldn't call them a plaintiff. Could that non-party?
We would dispute that they would have the standing to do that because it goes to the heart of.
Well, no. Let's see. Maybe I'm not being. Not being clear. Assume the universal injunction is good. Like, drop your argument right now.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
As they currently stand, could someone who is not named in the suit but a beneficiary bring a contempt proceeding?
I think that is what the respondents would certainly contend.
Do you concede that the plaintiffs could bring a Rule 23, like the individual plaintiffs?
We would dispute. I mean, we'd have to address the Rule 23 issues, kind of all the criteria as they came up.
But they could seek it. Okay, and then last
and
question.
They have done that in Western District of Washington. It's just never been briefed because they
okay, just last question on this point. The states have a different kind of claim for financial harm, and they've pointed out that it would be very difficult to remedy that without some sort of broader relief. I know you contest their standing. I want you to assume that I think they have standing. Why wouldn't they be entitled to an injunction of the scope of the one that has currently been entered?
I would say two reasons. First of all, it's not necessary to provide complete relief to the plaintiffs. What we offered, for example, in the District of Massachusetts in the First Circuit was an injunction that would enjoin the federal officials and order them to treat the people who would otherwise be covered by the executive order as eligible for the services that result in the pocketbook injuries to the states. And there's really no response to that. That is obviously would fully remediate their injuries and does not require the injunction to be applied in all other 50 states. One state comes in and says, well, people are going to move across state lines. Therefore, we've got 21 states in this case who don't want this relief. Sorry, you've got to impose it on everybody because it has to be offered to this one particular state. So that's one response. The other response is this notion that the states have to be provided a complete relief because of interstate travel and patchwork. I think that's very effectively responded to by Chief Judge Sutton's opinion in the Second Circuit, where he says, this is a problem. If we adopt this logic, it justifies a universal injunction in every single case, and that can't be the case. Fifth Circuit's recent DACA decision comes to the same conclusion.
What do you say, though, to the suggestion, General, that in this particular case, those patchwork problems for, frankly, the government, as well as for plaintiffs, justify broader relief?
As to the government, again, Chief Judge Sutton addressed that directly as well when he said that's the federal government's problem. In other words, the federal government, for example, in the First Circuit, we offered that as a narrower scope of injunction. And the decision was, well, that would cause you too many administrative problems. And I think Chief Judge Sutton directly addresses that when he says that's a problem for the executive branch.
That's your problem. All right. Yeah. And then with respect to class certification, your friends on the other side point out that takes time. And there are, as you've emphasized, hurdles that have to be met to achieve class certification. And the argument, of course, is that the injury is immediate and ongoing, and as Justice Sotomayor suggested, might be seriously questioned as to its compliance with this court's precedents. Your thoughts?
I would offer a couple of things in response to that. First of all, there are tools for the courts have tools to achieve sort of class-wide universal relief. I referred earlier there. We found 4 recent district court decisions where class-wide relief was given a kind of an emergency basis. However, more fundamentally than that.
And you agree that that's appropriate in certain cases?
It may be appropriate. We do not concede that it's appropriate in this case, but it may be appropriate in other cases. Certainly, it's an equitable tool that is consistent with, for example, the grant of equitable authority in the 1789 Judiciary Act, as this court interpreted in the Grupo Mexicano decision, and honestly, a line of decisions going all the way back to the early 19th century. judiciary. So there are tools to address emergency situations, but more fundamentally than that, it is a feature, not a bug, of Article 3 that courts grant relief to the people who sue in front of them. So the notion that relief has to be given to the whole world because others who have not taken the time to sue are not before the courts is something that results in all these problems.
Last question. Do we need to reach the Article 3 question? I mean, wouldn't it be wise, even if you were to prevail, for the court to reserve that question rather than decide that Congress, for example, could never endow this court with that authority?
That's exactly correct. The court does not have to rest on Article 3 because the court could say, and as we've argued, and as Justice Thomas' separate opinion in Trump against Hawaii says, the 1789 Judiciary Act, when it said suits in equity or what the federal courts can do, we had nothing like this in mind. And then I point to the language in Grupo Mexicano where the court said there what was at issue was a preliminary injunction that froze in likely insolvent debtors' assets so that the plaintiff could collect at the end of the case. And the court said that's a nuclear weapon in the law, and we're not that had no analog in 1789 in the practices of the Court of Chancery. And if that's a nuclear weapon, I don't know what this is, where repeatedly 40 times in this administration we're being enjoined against the entire world.
I'm just going to ask you to put yourself in a different frame of mind. Hard to do. Assume something you won't want to assume. But the assumption that I want you to make is that on the merits, which of course you did not take to this court, on the merits, you are wrong, that the EO is unlawful. And I want to ask you, if we assume that, how do we get to that result on your view of the rules?
It is very difficult for me to attempt the hypothetical, but I will.
You know, I think that that's the important question in this case. Let's just assume you're dead wrong. How do we get to that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long does it take? How do we get to the result that there is a single rule of citizenship that is the rule that we've historically applied rather than the rule that the EO would have us do?
Rule 23 would be one natural path, assuming that a class could be certified, which we might dispute in this particular case.
Well, you might dispute it. And, you know, I think the question is there a class that's just all children of people who have entered illegally? You know, is that an appropriate class? Can the same thing be done under Rule 23? Or are you going to tell me that, no, Rule 23 has lots of requirements and you'll never be able to certify a class like that?
Rule 23 provides the equitable tools subject to rigorous criteria, appropriately rigorous criteria, to obtain that kind of class-wide and
that suggests to me you're going to be standing up here in the next case saying that Rule 23 is inapt for this circumstance with this number of people, maybe with some questions that are individual, who knows. So let's put Rule 23 aside, because I got to tell you that does not fill me with great confidence. How else are we going to get to the right result here, which is on my assumption that the EO is illegal?
That would be a profoundly wrong result, but I think what I would offer is that, very similar to Labrador against Poe, what the court should be engaging here is a balancing of the equitable factors as to the scope of remedial relief, not as to the underlying merits. And our contention that this exceeds the traditional scope of equity that's reflected in the 1789 Judiciary Act, we're overwhelmingly likely to succeed on those merits for all the reasons that I've stated in our briefs.
Yes, I mean, that's a lot of words, and I don't have an answer for if one thinks, and you know, look, there are all kinds of abuses of nationwide injunctions. But I think that the question that this case presents is that if one thinks that it's quite clear that the EO is illegal, how does one get to that result in what time frame on your set of rules without the possibility of a nationwide injunction?
On this case and on many similar cases, the appropriate way to do it is for there to be multiple lower courts considering it, the appropriate percolation that flows through the lower courts, and then ultimately this court decides the merits in a nationwide binding precedent. You have a complete inversion of that through the nationwide injunctions where the district.
So, General Sauer, are you really going to answer Justice Kagan by saying there's no way to do this expeditiously?
Well, I'll refer to my former answers. Rule 23 provides the tools to do so. Multiple injunctions.
But you resisted Justice Kagan when she said, could the individual plaintiffs form a class?
We That has never been briefed in the court below. I do not concede that we wouldn't oppose class certification in this particular case. There may be arguments that this case is or is not appropriate for class certification. And
If there were a class appropriate for class certification, you concede that that could resolve the question quickly.
Yes, absolutely.
You concede it could resolve the question quickly through precedent.
Yes, absolutely. It could do so. I mean, we obviously dispute the.
So just on that point.
And if the court, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, please. All right, I got a quick one.
Well, I'm just going to say just on that point. So, let's say that we're an individual person even. Let's say it wasn't a class, and goes up and gets a ruling from the Second Circuit that the EO is illegal. Does the government commit to not applying its EO in the entire Second Circuit? Or does it say, no, we can continue to apply the rule as to everybody else in the Second Circuit?
I can't say as to this individual case. Generally, our practice is to respect circuit precedent within the circuit, but there are exceptions.
Yes, that is generally your practice. And I'm asking whether it would be your practice in this case.
Okay, guys. I think you got a taste of what oral argument is like at the United States Supreme Court. These are highly complex issues that have been briefed in writing, and the justices are focusing on pushing. In this case, you're just hearing Donald Trump's attorney. You didn't get to hear the attorneys in this case for the respondents, pushing them on issues to know where to draw the line. What you can see is that the government, I just want to let you know what is actually up before the court. What happened in this case is after the executive order trying to eviscerate birthright citizenship, right? After that happened, parties sued in various states saying this is unconstitutional, citing the numerous precedents that you just saw Justice Sotomayor raise, saying that there is a line of cases that even go so far as to say, even if your parents came here illegally, if you are born here, you are entitled to birthright citizenship, right? So she goes through the whole line of cases. And so these people sued, these organizations and individuals sued and secured injunctions to put that order on hold. And in the courts where they sued, the judges issued nationwide injunctions saying that this is that they believe that on the merits on this case, that this will be ruled unconstitutional. So they're putting it on hold across the country. What Trump's lawyers did, they wanted to avoid the question of whether his order was unconstitutional because they know it is. Instead, when they brought this case up to the U.S. Supreme Court, they are only asking whether federal judges have the ability to issue nationwide injunctions, right? They don't want to get to the merits. And Justice Kagan is hammering this in this argument because she's saying, you're never going to let us get to the merits. You're going to make these arguments that we don't have, that the only way we could even stop this order from being in effect is for cases to be brought by individuals across the country, across all 93 or 94 federal district courts, or maybe even more, maybe all the different courthouses, but even more, maybe every single person in the country who would be affected has to bring their own lawsuit. He's not making it clear. So he is trying to use procedural arguments about the limitations of federal courts to act in order to keep this unconstitutional order in effect. The problem here, though, is the same kind of thing happened under Biden and Obama. When they would issue executive orders, the people who didn't like them could find one judge who would try to do a nationwide injunction. So there is that issue. So I'm going to now share with you. Remember, we have these cases up before the court. It's now 10 a.m. And I want to share with you the homepage of SCOTUS blog so we can watch what is happening. Okay, so I think if you see this, what I'm looking at here, and I'm also going to give you in the chat, if you want to also watch it separately on your phone or on your screen. This is, I want to try to expand this if I can. Pop out. Did that work? Are you looking at the pop out? No, you can't do that. Okay, I think you can. Are you seeing the pop out now to all the cases? I think you might be. Let's see. Let me look and see. Great. So you've got this pop out and it's bigger. And I'm going to tell you what's going on here, obviously. What you see here is that we are waiting. This is a live chat, right? And so at 10:02 a.m., we are seeing our first decision. And I'm going to pop this open. Oh my God, we got to our case. Holy shit. Okay. Can you see what I am looking at now? It is the decision in Trump v. Casa. They went with the big one first. Okay. Holy shit, you guys. Okay, I'm going to read this to you real quick. I'm not doing the syllabus. This was Justice Barrett. Interesting. Delivered the opinion of the court. I am reading this to you live. Are you with me? I think you are. Okay. I'm trying to make this a little bit, I think, can you see this? Yes, great. Justice Barrett delivered the opinion of the court. The United States has filed 3 emergency applications challenging the scope of a federal court's authority to enjoin government officials from enforcing an executive order. Traditionally, courts issued injunctions prohibiting executive officials from enforcing a challenged law or policy only against the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. Okay, the injunctions before us today reflect a more recent development. District courts asserting the power to prohibit enforcement of a law or policy against anyone. These injunctions, known as universal injunctions, likely exceed the equitable authority that Congress granted to federal courts. We therefore grant the government's applications to partially stay the injunctions entered below. Okay, this is a little more complicated. The applications before us concern 3 overlapping universal preliminary. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, guys, I'm doing a cheat sheet. That was how she began. I'm going to look at the syllabus of this so we can find out what the holding is. Holding. Universal, again, this is a summary, not in her own words. Universal injunctions likely exceed the equitable authority that Congress has given to federal courts. The court grants the government, meaning Donald Trump's application for a partial stay of the injunctions entered below, but only to the extent that the injunctions are broader than necessary to provide complete relief to each plaintiff withstanding to sue. Okay, what does that mean? Let's look at this. The issue raised by these applications, whether Congress has granted federal courts authority to universally enjoin the enforcement of an executive order, plainly warrants this court's review. Okay, fine. Next, the government is likely to succeed on the merits of the claim that the district courts lacked authority to issue universal injunctions. Fine. And they're saying universal injunctions are not sufficiently analogous to any relief available in the court of equity. So they're talking about there's no precedent for these, on and on. And let's get to they talk about the Bill of Peace that we heard. Respondents contend that the universal injunction, or at least these universal injunctions, are simply an application of the principle that a court of equity may fashion a remedy that awards complete relief. And she says here, prohibiting enforcement of the executive order against the child of an individual pregnant plaintiff will give the plaintiff complete relief. Her child will not be denied citizenship, and extending the injunction to cover everyone similarly situated would not render her relief any more complete. So the individual and associational respondents are wrong to characterize a universal injunction as simply an application of the complete relief principle. It goes on and on and on. Okay. Now, we have Barrett delivered the opinion. Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh joined. And of course, Sotomayor dissented. And Kagan and Jackson joined, and Jackson filed their own dissent. I want to get to the dissent. Sorry, guys, I'm scrolling really fast. I'm really disgusted by this decision, but I need to get, I'm getting through Kavanaugh's concurrence. Okay, here we go. Here's Sotomayor's dissent. Remember, Kagan and Jackson joined her. And then we're going to get a separate dissent also from Jackson. Guys, I'm really pissed off by this. Whew. Whew. Okay. Children born in the United States and subject to its laws are United States citizens. That has been the legal rule since the founding, and it was the English rule well before then. This court once attempted to repudiate it, holding in Dred Scott versus Sanford that the children of enslaved Black Americans were not citizens. To remedy that grievous error, the states passed in 1866 and Congress ratified in 1868 the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause, which enshrined birthright citizenship in the Constitution. There it has remained, accepted and respected by Congress, by the executive, and by this court until today. It is now the president who attempts in an executive order to repudiate birthright citizenship. Every court to evaluate the order has deemed it patently unconstitutional, and for that reason has enjoined the federal government from enforcing it. Undeterred, the government now asks this court to grant emergency relief, insisting it will suffer irreparable harm unless it can deprive at least some children born in the United States of citizenship. The government does not ask for complete stays of the injunctions, as it ordinarily does before this court. Why? The answer is obvious. To get such relief, the government would have to show that the order is likely constitutional, an impossible task in light of the Constitution's text, history, this court's precedents, federal law, and executive branch practice. So the government instead tries its hand at a different game. It asks this court to hold that no matter how illegal a law or policy, courts can never simply tell the executive to stop enforcing it against anyone. Instead, the government says it should be able to apply the citizenship order to everyone except the plaintiffs who filed this lawsuit. Okay? The gamesmanship in this request is apparent, and the government makes no attempt to hide it. Yet, shamefully, this court plays along. A majority of this court decides that these applications of all cases provide the appropriate occasion to resolve the question of universal injunctions and end the centuries-old practice once and for all. In its rush, to do so, the court disregards basic principles of equity, as well as the long history of injunctive relief granted to non-parties. No right is safe in the new legal regime the court creates. Today, the threat is to birthright citizenship. Tomorrow, a different administration may try to seize firearms from law-abiding citizens or prevent people of certain faiths from gathering to worship. The majority holds that, absent cumbersome class actions, courts cannot completely enjoin such plainly unlawful policies unless doing so is necessary to afford the formal parties complete relief. That holding renders constitutional guarantees meaningful in name only for any individual who are not parties to a lawsuit, because I will not be complicit in so grave an attack on our system of law. I dissent. Holy shit. Okay, that's the beginning of Sotomayor's dissent. Again, Kagan and KBJ joined her. I want to now read the beginning of KBJ's dissent. Sotomayor wrote a very lengthy dissent. It's obviously the main dissent. But I also, sorry for my scrolling, my fast scrolling, but it's long. Okay, still here. Okay, let's get to KBJ. Here we go. Her dissent is shorter, but let's read. Oof. The power to compel the executive to follow the law is particularly vital when the relevant law is the Constitution. When the executive transgresses an act of Congress, there are mechanisms through which Congress can assert its check against the executive unilaterally, such as, for example, asserting the power of the purse. But when the executive violates the Constitution, the only recourse is in the courts. Eliminate that check, and our government ceases to be one of limited powers. After all, a limit that does not confine the person on whom it is imposed is no limit at all. I'm sorry, I was reading her section 1 of her opinion. That's key. I want to get to her intro, though. Here we go. I agree with every word of Justice Sotomayor's dissent. I write separately to emphasize a key conceptual point. The court's decision to permit the executive to violate the Constitution with respect to anyone who has not yet sued is an existential threat to the rule of law. It is important to recognize that the executive's bid to vanquish so-called universal injunctions is, at bottom, a request for this court's permission to engage in unlawful behavior. When the government says, quote, do not allow lower courts to enjoin executive action universally as a remedy for unconstitutional conduct, end quote, what it is actually saying is that the executive wants to continue doing something that a court has determined violates the Constitution. Please allow this. That is some solicitation. With its ruling today, the majority largely grants the government's wish. But in my view, if this country is going to persist as a nation of laws, and a nation and not men, the judiciary has no choice but to deny it. Simply stated, what it means to have a system of government that is bounded by law is that everyone is constrained by the law, no exceptions. And for that to actually happen, courts must have the power to order everyone, including the executive, to follow the law, full stop. To conclude otherwise is to endorse the creation of a zone of lawlessness within which the executive has the prerogative to take or leave the law as it wishes, and where individuals who would otherwise be entitled to the law's protection become subject to the executive's whims instead. Whew. Okay. It's where we are. We have the dual state. I will have more to say about this on Monday. I want to thank you for sticking with me. I don't want to stay around for all the other decisions. I thought this one would come last. I think we have heard enough from the court today. Thank you for joining me. And with that, I bid you all adieu.
Hello, Prism mates. It's the Gen Taub show where welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Gen Taub show.